Okay, today we're going to talk about sprinting. Now, sprinting is one of those things that I find is kind of a double-edged sword. If you're dealing with power athletes, and so pretty much all athletes except cross-country runners and distance track runners, power athletes all should probably be sprinting on the regular in their programming. There's nothing else like it that replicates it, and its transfer over to sport is just ambiguous with all power sports. Volleyball, basketball, football, baseball, softball, you name it, it requires the ability to sprint. Now, it might not require the ability to sprint for a long time, but it requires the ability to accelerate and get up to some fast speed. So sprinting is one of those things that all athletes should do probably on a yearly basis. They should continue to sprint year round instead of have like your normal standard, we sprint for football, we don't do any sprinting for basketball, we pull our hip flexors and hamstrings in track, we run through the season in track with hurt hamstrings and hip flexors, we get a little bit of a break at the end of the spring, some football weights at the beginning of the summer doesn't associate with a lot of sprinting, then we have some hell weeks in the summer where we pull our hamstrings again and we wonder why our athletes aren't progressing in their speed, and it's probably because sprinting is one of those traits that needs to be trained year round. It needs to be trained 12 months a year in some capacity. Now you'll pull back during certain seasons and you'll push forward during other seasons, but what I find is we don't have a long enough ramp up with a lot of the athletes I work with. So sprinting is one of those things, if someone hasn't sprinted for a while, it's probably going to take them 6-8 weeks to build up to like a 90 or 100% sprint. Now, a lot of coaches I've worked with in the past will be surprised when a kid hurts themselves week one. I've done it myself when I was a younger coach. I would have people who hadn't sprinted sprint 100%, be surprised that they pulled a muscle. And you really need to think of sprinting as at 100% as kind of the same as like maxing out your back squat or maxing out your bench. If you haven't been lifting for 6-9 months, and then the first time you come to the gym, we have you just max out your back squat, I wouldn't be surprised if you hurt something. Same thing with sprinting. You sprint at 100% and you haven't trained sprinting for a while, you don't want to be surprised where a hamstring, a groin, or a hip flexor gets pulled and goes. So we need to learn to periodize for adequate volumes for sprinting for our athletes. And as a good general rule of thumb, 3 to 8 sprints a day, 2 days a week is probably really appropriate. And so most athletes, if they're middle school, freshmen, maybe sophomores in high school, they only need to do 3 to 4 sprints to really get that adaptation. Because when you think about sprinting, it's a lot more of a software issue within the body than a hardware issue. They're trying to teach their muscles to contract at a fast rate. And that trait in their body gets zapped pretty quickly. And so you only need 3 or 4 practice sprints to check that box. Elite level athletes still will only sprint 6, 7, or 8 times a day. You're talking a D1 college athlete or someone past that in the professional realm. They're not doing 20, 15, 12 even sprints a day because they just don't have it in them. Like after 6 or 7 sprints, they're zapped, they're done. An 8 sprint day would be like a high volume day. And so with most of your athletes, what you want to do is you want to pull them back to actually practice the skill of sprinting and make sure that the rest periods are long enough to allow for a full recovery. Sprinting is also one of those things we want to have a real adequate warm up into. So when I was coaching sprints, a lot of what we would do with our athletes is we would ramp up their distances and ramp up their intensities. So you wouldn't just go for a 100-meter sprint after a dynamic warm up, but we would do 20-yard, 40-yard, 60-yard get outs to build up to that intensity. Just like if you were maxing a back squat on a day, you wouldn't not warm up for it. You would do a set of 12 with the bar, a set of 8 with some extra weight, a set of 6, a set of 4, a double, a single that was performed with like 90-95%, something you felt really comfortable at getting, and then you would go for a 1 rep max. Same thing with sprinting, you want to build up to that. Now, one thing you can do is you can shorten the sprint distance that you're having your athletes work with, and then they just can only get going so fast, and it might not require as much of a warm-up. If you're doing 10, 20-yard sprints, that doesn't require as much of a warm-up, and they can't get going as fast anyways, and so it's harder for them to actually pull themselves, because a lot more muscles get pulled at top-end speed, which is starting to occur around like 30 yards up to about 50 yards. So if you're doing 30 to 50 yard sprints, your athletes are actually starting to hit top end speed, and that's where you want to be a little more cautious about your warm up and also your weekly volume that you're utilizing with your athletes.